Hey everyone, guess what? We're rebranding to be more inclusive of technologies and business solutions that extend even further than low code. New podcast, new name, same great group of people, and the coolest new song. I'm Sean Fiene, Senior Product Marketing Manager on the Power Platform and Microsoft Copilot Studio team, and I'm joined by...
I'm Wendy Haddad. I'm a Senior Customer Experience Program Manager on the Planner team, and I am joined by...
That title still throws me off, Wendy. I'm waiting for you
Me
to say
too.
something else. Hi, I'm Ken Auguillard, Principal Program Manager here within Power Platform, Copilot Studio, MCS, Agent Builder, and pretty much everything else that is governance and security. One quick note, my daughter recently got married. Kelsey, Christopher, I wish you a very long and happy and prosperous marriage. And with that,
Congratulations.
Wendy, who do we have with
Personal
us today?
update there.
Yes, personal update.
Congratulations to Kelsey and Christopher. I am so excited. I've actually been wanting to do this episode for a while on just SharePoint in general, and then it seemed like great timing with the SharePoint Knowledge Agent. So we have Julie Seto, the Principal Product Manager from SharePoint. Julie, do you want to introduce yourself and explain to us what is the SharePoint Knowledge Agent?
Sure. Thanks for having me, and congratulations, Ken.
Thank you.
So I'm Julie Seto. I work on SharePoint with a focus on AI. And we recently released something new called the SharePoint Knowledge Agent. It went into public preview in September. And it is essentially an intelligent content curator to help any user in SharePoint tackle content chaos and find information faster.
Very cool. So SharePoint has been around forever. All three of the hosts today were former SharePoint admins and developers, and we've got lots of experience and love for SharePoint. And so for your average SharePoint user, like your power user in SharePoint, what's the pain point that this solves? What does SharePoint Knowledge Agent solve for those power users?
Yeah, great question. So we actually think of our users in a couple different buckets. A lot of SharePoint users would have a job title like knowledge manager or information manager, and they're essentially responsible for making sure all of the documents are organized, employees at the company can find them, and then governance things, they're retained for the right amount of time. They have correct sensitivity labels. And a lot of the time that can be really manual and time consuming. So for those specific users, content managers, who would tend to work with a large volume of documents and document libraries, the Knowledge Agent helps them with organization, adds automatic metadata so that documents are easy to find, both by people and by Copilot and agents. But the SharePoint Knowledge Agent is a pretty broad product. So there are a couple other users we had in mind. Another is site managers. So that would be someone who manages intranet at a company. And again, all in the spirit of helping employees find information, but they would be looking to make sure that their intranet sites stay up to date, that there aren't any broken links, that they have pages to answer questions that users would search for. So for site managers, we help them essentially keep their content fresh and find issues. And there's actually kind of two more things because this is a big product. The other is content creators. So this could be maybe a marketing manager at a company who publishes all that content on the intranet, specifically, composing pages. With advances in AI, anytime we're authoring content, we expect it to be faster now. The agent helps create FAQs and helps you, author in real time with Copilot. And then lastly, many of the users, actually the majority of the users who use SharePoint are your average information worker, storing and finding documents. A Knowledge Agent helps them to, specifically with Q&A and contextual Q&A, so that they can ask questions and the content that, matters to them that they work with the right context and get accurate answers faster.
So Julie, as a former SharePoint admin, you have now filled my head with questions.
That's all right.
So I'm going to put myself in the customer seat just for a moment.
Yeah.
And you've said a lot of great, phenomenal things, like especially talking about data classification and so on. But I'm a little curious, what document types are supported? Can I use SharePoint list inside of there? Is it the whole gambit of everything that is SharePoint, or are there some limitations?
Yeah, great question. So a way to break it down is if you think of sort of SharePoint containers, we've got sites, document libraries, and lists. Currently, we support sites and document libraries. And then lists is something our customers are definitely asking for. We've got a lot of fans of lists. So that's something the team will work on to come in the future to Knowledge Agent. And then in terms of what types of documents, essentially all the standard, documents and intranet page formats that are supported by SharePoint PDFs, images, all your Microsoft 365 files, with maybe 2 exceptions I'll call out. Right now, if you have a really specialized file, say a CAD file, Knowledge Agent at the moment can extract metadata from that unless it's a situation where OCR, optical character recognition, or essentially extracting text from images would apply. And then Knowledge Agent respects all of these sort of information governance policies. So a specific thing to call out is that Knowledge Agent will not extract metadata from encrypted files right now, by design, because they're encrypted for a reason.
So speaking of respecting things, I would be remiss if I didn't ask the security question. And that
Absolutely.
is,
I was waiting for that.
how do these agents work in terms of accessing data? So, because again, I'm putting myself in the customer seat right now. So I'm going to just assume that, of course, I respect all of these SharePoint access controls and so on. You already just said that they definitely respect the labels of encryptions and so on.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So the Knowledge Agent was built inside of SharePoint. We call it the SharePoint Knowledge Agent for a reason, because it's fully integrated in Microsoft 365. And we think that's one of the most important aspects of the product, because IT admins are looking for all of the security, compliance, and governance that they expect from Microsoft 365. And the Knowledge Agent respects that. So I'll kind of give 2 concrete examples. The first is who can see what information. Of course, that's critical, and the Knowledge Agent respects all existing permissions. So if you have, a site or a document library or even a folder that's shared with a subset of users, say it's only shared with Ken, and then Sean, you go and do Q&A with the agent won't give you answers from sites and folders that you don't have access to. Those permissions are inherited. And then I think there's another important angle to talk about, and that's, you might not want anyone at your company sort of, authoring intranet pages or creating columns and metadata. So the Knowledge Agent, one of the main surfaces to access it is through, we call it the floating access button, or it's the SharePoint icon at the bottom of the screen. And it's contextual to a users and the permissions they have. So for example, a content manager with more advanced document library permissions will see actions they could do, like organize document library, create SharePoint rules, that sort of thing. But if a person, say, only had view permission, they'll just see Q&A on a document library, because we respect the SharePoint permissions that an individual user has. So we think about it in terms of what a user can do with a Knowledge Agent and respecting their sort of existing capabilities in SharePoint, which we look at the user's permission, as well as respecting information access and what files and sites are visible to certain users.
Julie, this might be a little bit of a curveball.
Sure.
I'm just thinking about, and it's funny, we just got off of an episode last week we just published one with Andrew Gaskins, and he's a customer at Lumen, and some of the great work that they're doing around agents in their organization. And part of this is this discussion was managing these human agent teams. When I think about knowledge agent, knowledge management, right? And you're in a really interesting space, because it seems that you're helping curate this information for both humans and maybe for agents or for AI to be able to ground. So can you speak a little bit about that? Because you mentioned kind of generating metadata, you're talking about extracting things, organizing things. And I just wonder if I can tease out a little bit of your thinking and where you're going around.
Yeah, great question. So I think it's as simple as frontier firms need AI-ready content. And Knowledge Agent is really built to help humans directly when they're interacting with the Knowledge Agent to make sure their content is organized or they're doing Q&A, but it's as importantly built for Copilot and agents. Sometimes people refer to this problem as garbage in, garbage out. And that's sort of a common saying in our industry right now that really means, AI answers are grounded. They come from specific content. And if that content is higher quality, the answers will be higher quality and more trustworthy. So the Knowledge Agent uses all of that metadata and then the curation you do on sites as well to look for broken links so you don't send users down paths that don't lead them anywhere useful, and to make sure content is fresh and correct so that Copilot and agents give better answers and they give correct answers based on the right set of content.
Hey, Julie, all of this is awesome, just like Ken said earlier. I'm curious about the adoption of Knowledge Agent, right? And how do we expect the virality of knowledge? Because everybody's using SharePoint, right? It's just like,
yes,
it's like Word, it's like Excel, right? Like everybody's using this type of technology. So can you walk me through the user experience and how do you grow champions with Knowledge Agent, so that way people are like, man, this is awesome. I need to incorporate this in my workday.
Yeah, great question. So I'll answer this in a couple ways. First, how do you adopt Knowledge Agent, as a user at your company? So Knowledge Agent is in public preview and it is opt-in. So an admin would need to choose to opt in to this public preview and run a commandlet. And then once the tenant is opted in, the individual users of all Knowledge Agent need to have a Copilot license. So there's that sort of setup. And then the Knowledge Agent really takes a lot of existing capabilities in SharePoint and makes them much easier to do. So a really good way to get started is so many of our users are already SharePoint customers, doing something specific. And I would encourage them to try that with Knowledge Agent. So to give you a concrete example, we have many customers who are content managers who have been using the autofill feature as part of SharePoint Premium that's been in market for a while, or even potentially using legacy syntax models. And for their core job, they need to keep a lot of content organized. So that's a great sort of vector of adoption to work with those customers we already have a relationship with, who already need to do these types of tasks as part of their job. And then we show them a way that we hope is, much easier and faster to get that done. And we have, given sort of the breadth of users that Knowledge Agent serves, we have a large team working on it who have a lot of customer relationships, specifically with people authoring site pages, managing internet sites as site managers, managing content. So we're really using a lot of our existing customers and fans who already want to do the jobs to be done that the Knowledge Agent tackles in SharePoint. And we're sort of attracting their attention by suggesting we have, a better, faster, more modern way to do that. And then we've also had a really, really good response from our MVP community. We're very grateful to them. They've been early adopters of Knowledge Agent and creating a lot of content to help our customers understand what it is and potential, first use cases or next steps.
You mentioned metadata a few times, so let's get into that. Can you give us some examples
Sure.
of whether it's
Yeah.
your team or you mentioned the customer relations, like how are people as I try to think of what kinds of files, how would I extract the metadata? What would I use? What kinds of file types? Give us some success stories here.
Yeah, definitely. So actually, I'll just start with explaining what metadata is, because not everybody
Yeah.
knows. Metadata is essentially information about a file, stored about the file. So, all files have a title and, a date created and a date modified. That's sort of the most basic of metadata. And then you can add more metadata, more information about a file. And that's stored in SharePoint. And visually, you would normally see it, as an example, in a document library with columns. And it's really, really useful because metadata is used for search and retrieval. Copilot and agents will use metadata to retrieve answers when you're prompting and doing Q&A. And you can run business automations on it. So I'll give you a couple examples. Something that we see a lot of customers do is related to like payroll, accounts payable, and invoices. So there'll be companies that are working with, say thousands of invoices, and they'll have Knowledge Agent extract something like amount due, vendor name, and date due. And then you can imagine knowing that you could set up notifications. So maybe we have a customer where they only need manual approval of an invoice if it's over a certain amount. So you could work with a Knowledge Agent to say something like, if a new invoice is uploaded and amount due is over $5,000, send me an email. And that can trigger that more manual approval when it's needed. And then when it's not, you essentially
And this
sort
is
of
low
automated
code,
this.
no code? Sorry, this is
No
low code
code.
or no code?
All
No
through
code
natural language.
automations.
Yep. So all no code done in SharePoint, backed by SharePoint rules, just through natural language prompts. I'll give you a couple other metadata examples. So I think that, accounts payable, receipts, and invoices are really easy to understand. We also have a lot of customers using metadata on resumes, where they'll upload a whole bunch of resumes and then they'll extract things like candidate degree, maybe years of experience in industry, has, say, skill X, yes or no, things like that. So we see customers using metadata in scenarios where it extracts something from the document. But metadata can also be about the document, like classification. So we'll also have customers where their sort of company process is everyone just uploads a variety of files to one place, and the Knowledge Agent could classify them. Maybe this is a contract, this is an invoice, this is you can imagine N number
It's like
of types
sorting
of
it,
documents.
basically.
Sorting it. And then metadata can also be generative. So it could be a summary. So we see a lot of customers using the Knowledge Agent to write a brief summary of a file, and you could just prompt it, create a column that summarizes this document in less than, say, 20 words. And then customers get into more interesting, complex cases. So we have some customers using it for RFP analysis, and they've written a fairly long custom
Interesting.
prompt on what they're looking for. Then we have a customer, for example, that's scoring RFPs, and then a human might review the ones that score, say, 8 or higher out of 10, as an example.
That's fascinating. And just a very fast follow up here with that auto created metadata, is
Mhm.
this labeled in such a way? I mean, even just like type out RFPs or resumes, where are we keeping the human in the loop? Is it labeled as AI generated?
Yeah, great question. Yes, it's labeled as AI generated, and there's always a human in the loop. So you can use the knowledge agent when it comes to metadata to suggest columns as well as populate those columns with metadata. And then you see that in an experience that's essentially a visual preview. So you can check, as a human, does this column seem to make sense? Does the metadata make sense? And if you want to go in, you can look at the prompt that generates the metadata itself, and you can tweak that and you can test it on specific files. We have a lot of customers who spend time testing on specific sort of edge case files. For example, with our customer doing resumes, they have some very long CVs coming from people with an academic background that could be 5, 10 pages, your classic one-page resume, and some modern, really more visual resumes. So they wanted to make sure, is it working across this breadth of files? To give you a concrete example, you as the user, whether you want to get really in the weeds to testing to ensure, your niche use cases work, or you're more of a quick, like, okay, gut check, that looks good. Either way, you have to say sort of, yes, I approve, save this as the human in the loop, and then it will be written to SharePoint for others in the organization to use and see.
Julie, I want to take
And that human in the loop principle, that's really important to us. And you see it across all of the knowledge agent skills. So for example, if knowledge agent is going to remove stale links, it would never just do that. Of course, you would get to see the links it recommends and you would approve essentially, before that happens. And most of our human in the loop interactions either happen in chat, or for things that are a bit more visual, like metadata and columns, it happens in sort of a preview canvas in the UI.
I'm going to take a small step back just for a moment, Julie, as I'm listening to this, and this is great. But now I'm curious, who is this for? Because SharePoint serves small enterprises. It can serve, large enterprises. We use it here internally within Microsoft. But who
Yeah.
is this product for? Is it are we targeting a specific company? I mean, a customer base? Are we targeting a specific industry? Can
Yeah.
you help us out with that a little bit?
Great question. Yeah. So the short answer is it's for everyone, but I will, unpack that a little bit. So if we think about types of businesses, enterprise, small or medium business, we believe it's for everyone. Every business has content, and our research kind of showed that across the board, people struggle with content chaos. Even if you're a small company, you could work with a really high volume of documents. So I'll highlight it's not just for enterprise customers. For example, we talked to a small business that does insurance claims processing, but they still work with hundreds of thousands of documents a month, even if they have, I think they had in the range of 50 employees. So definitely, the breadth of enterprise all the way to small and medium business. In terms of the types of users at that company, we do think it's relevant to all SharePoint users. So as I'd kind of mentioned, we've got the more specialized roles like content manager and site manager, who tend to be more SharePoint power users, as well as the people who create content as SharePoint. But it's very much for any information worker using SharePoint, because we think the contextual Q&A and the knowledge agent's ability to do sort of simple actions on files like generate an audio overview or a summary are really valuable to all users. And the knowledge agents also for agents and AI to give better answers. And then kind of a third dimension is the cross industry, is knowledge agent for a particular industry or type of company. Again, we think it has really broad applicability. We see a lot of sort of functional roles across industry using knowledge agent. So for example, we have many customers that are in HR, finance, and marketing using knowledge agent, which is, relevant across industries. In particular, we've had a lot of consulting and sort of IT and software type companies use knowledge agent so far, but we're less than a month in market. So we've got a lot of early adopters, and we are starting to see customers sort of globally across the world, as well as spanning all of the industries that Microsoft's customers work in.
So one of the beauties about SharePoint, much like other things with low code, no code, is that SharePoint's very intuitive. I can upload a document, it just lands in my library. I can share it with Wendy and Sean and you, Julie. So how intuitive is the product? now? Is there a certain skill set that I need to have for myself before I can start using it?
Yeah, great question. It was a core principle in our product making that the knowledge agent needs to be really easy to use. And part of what we wanted to do is democratize and make more accessible some of the more power feature users in SharePoint. So the examples you said can like upload a document and share it. They're really easy to use, but as you
Right.
really get into the depth of SharePoint functionality, that is a more specialized skill. And we wanted Knowledge Agent to make things like management and content management more accessible to your average user. We don't want someone necessarily to be needing to find multiple things in the UI and stitch it all together. We wanted them to be able to just interact with natural language and essentially, tell the Knowledge Agent what it wants to do. So I'll give you a concrete example. Right now, if you say we go back to that example I had of you want manual review of an invoice that's over $1,000. Without Knowledge Agent, you need to be aware of the concept of metadata. You have to manually create a column. You could use autofill. If you're unaware of that feature, you have to, manually open all those invoices and kind of, write down what amount it is in the metadata or review it there. You have to be aware of SharePoint rules. You have to decide if you want to use, a rule or a workflow or go out of SharePoint and use Power Automate. There's a lot of decisions. There's a lot of stitching together. Or with the Knowledge Agent, you can just type in exactly what you want to do. Let me know if there's a new invoice over $1,000. And it stitches everything together. So I could give examples like that sort of across the board, but the spirit of it is that we make stitching together multiple capabilities of SharePoint and some of our more sort of power user features much easier to use for your average, say, information worker or someone who maybe is a little bit less sort of in the weeds of all the power of SharePoint.
No, okay. One, I love that, but let's maybe double click on that a little bit because what you're telling me is that the agents are helping me transform the way that I work right now. So how does that now evolve the way that I work? Is it like I'm hiring a staff aug with my agents, so to speak?
Yeah, great question. I think it does change how you work by design. I think we should all be thinking about working different ways in this era of Gen AI. To answer it specifically, I think it depends a little bit on the user's role. So if we think about my job as a product manager, how the knowledge agent would help me work differently is I can find information so much faster. When I do contextual Q&A and I'm working for specific product requirements deck, or maybe I'm looking for a bit of history. So I've only been working on SharePoint for a year. There's a lot of history in this project. So I might be looking for old, specs and strategy documents and stuff like that. The knowledge agent helps me find that much faster. And I find that I'm doing more searches within SharePoint using the contextual Q&A because being able to search within the context of my team or a certain product line or using the metadata is so useful. Kind of a completely different take on how do we work differently is some of our customers are Microsoft partners who typically would be hired to go to an organization and help set up SharePoint to help that business meet their desired business outcomes. And sometimes what would happen is there would be a really, really successful engagement. But then, our customer's customer, if that makes sense, sort of the end user. I was recently talking to an example of this, talking to a partner, and their customer was a municipality. And the employees of that municipality, their process changed and they needed a different SharePoint process. And it was tricky because they didn't know how to sort of update things. And the partner was kind of looking for new engagements and a little bit more complex work to deliver to a new client, not necessarily going in and messing with a metadata prompt. So the knowledge agent with its ease of use is able to help that end customer kind of have a more durable solution that they can tweak and modify over the long term when something relatively minor changes. I'm not saying it doesn't replace the partner's role for a big project configuring how can this organization use SharePoint, but our partners have been delighted that they can focus on the more complex tasks around change management and information management. And if it comes to tweaking an autofill prompt, because in this example, it actually had to do with parking tickets. The format of parking tickets changed and they needed to extract a different piece of metadata. The employees at the municipality were able to do that on their own. And it felt like it was a win for the municipality employees as well as the partner.
Hey, Julie, like your use cases have been phenomenal. And a lot of them have been focusing on the end user, right? Like the consumer of Knowledge Agent.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a step back and go into the admin role, right? Like we've got all these use cases. We're going to have a proliferation of knowledge agents all over the place. Can you talk about how an admin's day-to-day goes now with SharePoint Knowledge Agents being in the mix?
Yeah. So in terms of sort of enabling a new product for the admin, that's choosing to opt in. And then an admin can opt out of certain sites. They don't want the knowledge agent, in its public preview form, sort of working on those sites. So it's sort of the setup piece. Tried to keep it really simple. There's nothing to install or sort of manage over time. Kind of in the day to day, if we've got an admin who's responsible for some of the content governance and ensuring, the right sensitivity labels are applied or the right sort of archival policies are applied. Our hope is it's made that admin's job much easier. We often hear from admins, they've maybe set up a structure for a site and they rely on end users at the company to help create metadata or follow a process to get, say, the right sensitivity labels applied or the right content governance policy. Now that can be automated. So I think the admin can have a bit more, trust and a more complete set of metadata. And a lot of our customers are using it specifically for archive policy right now, as well as sensitivity labels. Sometimes they're kind of doing interesting prompts that are more generative in nature to kind of analyze a document, and then they'll set logic, if that's true, then set the sensitivity labels to a higher setting. And then kind of from there, policies they've already set up, with respect to information protection. There's no sort of extra work there because Knowledge Agent is built into SharePoint using kind of all the existing concepts.
So two-part question for you, Julie. And I know we're camping here a lot, but I think all of the agents are so valuable, but this one is uniquely valuable, right? In the kind of things that it does and the pain points that it addresses. Part number one is I'd love to hear your favorite feature out of the SharePoint agent that you use personally. And part two is a value of these agents, kind of keeping in theme with the human in the loop and what the agent does versus the human, et cetera. A value of the agents is freeing you up to do other things. So I'd love to hear in some of these processes, do you see, especially for someone coming into the industry or someone kind of changing and learning how to work with an agent, where should they be thinking about their skill set and where they can contribute value in working? And I think some of that comes into the prompting too, right? Of how do they approach work and building that skill set to work with the knowledge agent in their SharePoint sites.
Okay, so my favorite feature to demo to customers is clicking on Organize and Automate in a document library. It's essentially a content management feature because the agent is very autonomous. It automatically analyzes documents and suggests columns, and we see customers' faces light up with delight. So that's my favorite one to demo, but I'm not personally a content manager. I'm a product manager. So what I use in my day-to-day job, I have a tie for two favorite features. One is creating an intranet page from an existing file that helps me author sort of updates to the team, like status updates, news posts, like type of things, or sort of a summary of a new feature coming really quickly, because I tend to work really collaboratively in a document, iterating with designers and engineers, and then being able to really, really quickly transform that using the content creation features to a condensed intranet page right in context of SharePoint where I want to publish it. I love that. That really helps me. And that's tied with contextual Q&A. The answers I get using the Knowledge Agent with the sort of contextual Q&A part helps me so much because I have so many documents related to product making kind of organized different ways for our team. And I love to sort of find them in the context of maybe just looking through our team's library of product requirement documents and kind of having that grounding in context can help me get the right answer. Or a specific example actually is when I was thinking about this podcast and answers, I did some Q&A just based on our external marketing assets. Because as you can imagine, I have all sorts of files around ideation and early ideas, but we're not ready to disclose them. Some of them are just prototypes. We might not bring them forward. So it was really nice to sort of ground on the truth of what's out in market in the context of something like a podcast versus I'm actually giving a talk next week internally to some product managers on sort of, ideating around Gen AI based features. And I'm going to ground on essentially it's a document library about brainstorming. And just having that context is so much easier than me sort of manually looking for specific files. That contextual Q&A, I really love. Wendy, that was sort of a long answer to part one. Can you remind me what the next part of your question?
Well, first of all, I love that. And I'm going to steal some of that because the intranet page off a document is relevant to my work. So thank you. But the other part of the question was, knowledge management, there's a whole industry and degrees and skill sets around this. There's people coming, students coming into the industry. So
Mhm.
this is a very strong space where there's that human agent team. So, kind of the skill set, how should I be thinking about skill sets I should be developing? And some of that I think you teased out a little bit in the day of the life of an admin. You've mentioned kind of prompts. So, where should someone be kind of thinking about shifting their skill set or their organizational skill set to be able to take advantage and really contribute where the human value is unique, and then to play well with the SharePoint Knowledge Agent?
Yeah, definitely. I think sort of across the board for an information worker, anytime you are writing content or like composing content, let's say creating content kind of more broadly, because this would apply to words as well as visuals. If you're creating content, if you are trying to analyze sort of a large set of files, or you do a workflow that needs to happen more than 3 or 5 times. I think those are sort of flagship scenarios to think about how Gen AI is rapidly evolving and always changing. So my advice wouldn't be so much like use this exact tool right now to someone who's just coming out of school, because once they're a year into their job, it could have changed. But I think
Yeah.
knowing the strength of LLMs and where they could be applied, I think it's more a mindset of if I'm creating content, think about how I can sort of be assisted by AI to kind of ground on some docs to get started and write that first draft or review it or help me improve or, um, you know, transform content. A lot of our jobs, I think, it goes to the example I had. I had a Word document and I wanted it as a SharePoint intranet page. So if you're transforming, writing, editing, work with AI. Um, if you're processing large set of files, so that's a really specific example of Knowledge Agent right now. Metadata is a really, really relevant example of the knowledge management space. So if someone kind of comes in knowing that, things like attaching metadata to a document should be done by AI at this point in time, and then they can spend their energy on using that metadata for business value, setting up the right business processes, because metadata is always created for a purpose. And whether it's compliance or search and retrieval or that business process, I think if they sort of optimize the downstream benefit of AI, that's a really good place where someone could add value, as well as just addressing any anomalies. You always need a human in the loop. So for example, there might be some files where Knowledge Agent could not find the metadata you wanted. And then a human can add value, kind of addressing those anomalies instead of having to fill it out for everyone. And then I'd kind of mentioned any other sort of repetitive task or business automation. Right now with a knowledge agent, that's prompting in a natural language to set up rules for you, but you can imagine that's going to continue to evolve in the future. And with knowledge agent in particular, we're really thinking about scenarios that sort of cross the boundary of multiple SharePoint surfaces and integrations into M365, broadly. So I would encourage people to sort of come in with an attitude of like almost anything as possible in terms of automations. And right now, I think that's true within a single product. And I think there's a lot more to come in our industry and across Microsoft 365 with great integrations across multiple agents, agents calling sub agents and our different products working together.
Yeah, it's really exciting.
So, at the risk of getting the hook from our producer, I'm going to ask one more question here because I have not had a chance to put my hands together or stroke my chin type of question yet. So, doing both of those at the same time right now, this is going to be a good question.
Deep. Here we go.
What about my data that doesn't live in SharePoint? Let's say I have data in Dynamics in my CRM systems. So, what do I do there? How does my knowledge agent now interact with that?
Yeah, great question. Today, the knowledge agent is focused on SharePoint exclusively. There are so many files and so many people working in SharePoint. We think there's a ton of product value we can deliver with our current focus. But the product team is definitely thinking ahead, about cross-product, cross-Microsoft ecosystem,
Right.
and across third-party integrations, but we don't have any specifics to share on that yet. We are going to stay focused on SharePoint with the knowledge agent, in the very near future, as we have many things to come and a lot more we think the knowledge agent can do just within the context of SharePoint that will, deliver a lot of value for customers.
Answered just like how I would answer it being in the product group myself. Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
That is two things. That is a good segue to, like, there's a lot of more stuff coming. Julie, as we normally close out shows, what is your advice in 2 cents for organizations to get started? One, for the maker, like, where do I learn more? I know this is tenant admin, enable opt-in in public
Hmm.
preview. How does or not a maker, sorry, how does a individual that's getting started building SharePoint Knowledge Agents like learn more so they're prepared for this? And then also on the admin, what are the 2 tips that you would give out for both of those audiences?
Great. So for the end user to learn more, kind of the classic areas are tech community blog, our content on learn.microsoft.com and support.microsoft.com. Our blog is the great first, starting spot. It links to a video, which is probably your fastest way to get an overview and, in under 2 minutes, as well as a simulation, which lets you kind of really see how you'll actually use it in terms of where do you click on the UI and what happens next. So I would sort of start with the blog, the video, and the embedded sim, and then the blog links to, more in-depth learning and support articles from there. And then make sure you're set up where the tenant's enabled and you have a Copilot license. So for the IT admin, it's opting in, making sure users at their organization who would benefit have that Copilot license. And I did want to call out, we're very much early, we're a month in market. We're absolutely in listening, learning mode, and feedback we've heard loud and clear from IT admins is they want to be able to opt specific sites into Knowledge Agent. Right now, when you opt in your tenant, all your sites, are in it, and you have to opt out some. But we know some of our organizations have hundreds or thousands of sites. So site opt-in will come in November. And so if you're an IT admin who really wants that and you're waiting, you don't have too much longer to wait. So I think that's a really important note for our admins listening.
I can see them all cheering right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, no, that is huge. Like, just a heads up, at the time of recording, this is the end of October. So if you're listening to this in sometime in November, keep an eye out. This could be there. So like, let's celebrate and let's use it because this is awesome. Julie, thank you so much for joining us. This has been so knowledgeable for all of us on this team. I'm going to go dive in and start using the heck out of
That was
Knowledge
a
Agents.
pun by Sean.
It's like so knowledgeable. I saw it.
Well, wait, hold on. So look, I want to give Julie a lot of credit because this is Microsoft and we use acronyms like we're breathing air. And it dawned on me that SharePoint Knowledge Agent is SCA. And I don't know if this is a term that's going around Microsoft where everybody's like, going into the craze of SCA music. But have there been any puns across the teams that you can share with us? And if not, how do we start that trend?
Ooh, well, I am a ska fan, so I think I might dig out some old band t-shirts. Now that you mentioned that, our acronym we use is KA, but I like the full SharePoint Knowledge Agent, so I'm going to dig out, I think I have a mustard plug t-shirt somewhere in my closet.
There you go.
The team, let's see. I don't know that we have any really funny acronyms, but there's definitely a lot of Knowledge Agent puns. And then we have a funny thing we encounter a lot. Our team is working in Teams channels right now, which is great. And we use Teams channel agent, but our channel is called Knowledge Agent. So I'm constantly prompting the Knowledge Agent. And every time I do that, it just makes me laugh. Building an agent to work on an agent, as we kind of proliferate agents, I imagine I'm going to have these prompts sort of saying like, Knowledge Agent, agent, can you do this for me? So that kind of makes me laugh right now. I like the Scott connection. I don't have any other puns or acronyms for you though, top of mind.
This is what our listeners really want to know right here, Sean.
We need some good Scott outro music then.
Well, no, we'll make that happen. I think I just want to say, everybody, the call to action is for SharePoint Knowledge Agent, also known as SCA, is pick it up, pick it up, pick it up, pick it up. Like, do that, you'll be fine. But thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time. Thank you, Julie, for joining us.
Thanks,
this is
Julie.
great.
Thanks so much.